anyone got any news tonight? Andy, you
Yes.
got anything you want to tell us? Hang on, Roger. We're not interested in anything you've got to say. I'm interested in Andy. Andy.
Yeah, I'm reading a book
What?
on climate change.
Oh
Um,
no.
yeah,
Oh
well,
no.
and it was talking about how it gets very confusing because there are various parts of the world were affected by different periods of climate change years ago, and
Yeah.
other bits weren't. So it wasn't like global climate change; it's just certain areas. Like it was saying that the west coast of America was badly affected by a massive drought that lasted 60 years in
Oh.
in the 11th century, or the 11th and 12th century, which is what wiped out the what's it Indians, Pueblo, whatever they were.
Oh, they
Oh,
they were still around in the 1500s.
Well, maybe whatever, but it was
Yeah.
one of the Indian cultures. He said that it was 60 years of like 30% less rain, and they didn't survive. And I thought, and yet we didn't have that here. We had
No.
a warm period, but nowhere near as bad as that. And they said, I thought, oh, that's interesting. I never really thought about it hitting different places in different ways like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on, carry on.
That was it. Just thought that was interesting. So
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah, very interesting.
Oh, I thought you were going to say more. Go on,
Okay,
David.
yeah.
Anything from you, David?
No.
Which one?
Well,
No, you're Richard. David.
Oh, Richard. Well, Richard.
oh, Richard David checking in. I'm here.
No, you're Richard. This is David. Nothing from David. Okay, fair
Yeah.
enough. Thank you. What about Drina?
No, nothing.
Well, okay. I can tell you that Richard's a real clown. Right. Okay, Margaret.
Been reading a book from guess where about
is it from our library?
yeah.
Yeah. Go on.
It's the works of Tacitus.
Tacitus.
Tacitus or Tacitus or Tacitus.
Oh,
Anyway,
that's even better. I'm loving it. Let's just go with it. Go. Yeah. Go.
yeah, the Agricola and the Germania.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that Agricola was his father-in-law. Did you?
Oh no, I didn't know
I
that.
didn't know.
Yes. They
And
were
that's
related.
why he's very sycophantic because it's all about Agricola. How
My
wonderful
God,
and-
these words are coming out tonight.
Yeah, well, that's a whopper. You get a lot for the Scrabble on that.
Apparently Agricola is just the most amazing person you can imagine. Anyway, he says, who the first inhabitants of Britain were, whether natives or immigrants, is open to question.
Immigrants? Oh, that you can't use that word.
One must remember we are dealing with barbarians. That's us. But their physical characteristics vary, and the variation is suggestive. The reddish hair and large limbs of the Caledonians proclaim a German origin. The swarthy faces of the Silures, the tendency of their hair to curl, and the fact that Spain lies opposite leads one to believe that the Spaniards crossed in ancient times. And then he goes on about the Gauls and the British, and we have a lot in common.
There's a song there.
And he talks about how we adopted the toga and all the wonderful things that Rome brought to us. And he said we were very impressed with everything, but we in fact became slaves because of our love of all of that. We thought it was amazing, but in fact we became slaves to it all.
You become part of Rome, the embodiment of Rome, the embodiment of Rome.
Yeah, we were very impressed by it all, and we could speak Latin, a lot of them. Yeah. Anyway, it's quite an interesting book.
It's a bit like us being slaves to Coca-Cola and stuff like that, McDonald's.
But we were barbarians. Well, everybody was a barbarian unless they were Roman, weren't
Yes. Yeah.
Thomas Fella.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, look at Rog. He's a right mess.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Roger, any news from you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, What?
There was something. Who
Oh,
said
for
that?
God's sake!
Well, I just got to
Come
cut
on.
in then. Somebody cut in. Somebody a bit nagging. A find in Western Hungary in the volcanic hills
Hmm.
of over 900 metal articles, artifacts, jewelry, and militaria. And it goes back to as far as 1500 BC. This was what Jill found in her reviews on the internet. Has just recently been found. So they're delving into to see exactly what. It seems strange. It's mostly military weaponry with some jewelry. So either something they robbed, something got it, or the women in the troop have been carrying jewelry. Who knows? But that's an interesting one because it surprised them all. They didn't expect to find anything there apparently, and it came up in a farming whatever, and we'll wait to hear what they make of it.
Well, keep us up to date with that, with the reading. Thank you. Anne.
Well, I've been reading a book, and it's a book about how metals work, which you've covered quite a lot, different metals in mind.
Yeah.
And how each one of them changed so much in the world. And I mean, the conclusion, I haven't got to the end of the book, but he seems to be saying it's done an awful lot of damage generally to the environment and also things. But it was interesting that he took it as each metal, how each one of it changed something over time. I'm just reading about silver. When that became enormously mined, that seemed to lead to coinage and changed the world in that way. So each of these metals had done a big change at the time they were discovered and used.
So the influence of change in regards to metals and stuff.
Metals, yes. It's quite an interesting book, but as I say, you've covered a lot of it, and it reinforces what I've heard from you, some of it.
Good. And did you get that book from the library?
No, I didn't. Janice gave it to me
Oh.
to read.
Oh,
We spoke books, Janice and I.
Janice. Right, okay, quickly, anything for Emma and Richard?
Not from us.
Okay, before we well, we're not going to bother with Judith. But before we go to Judith, I don't know if any of you listened to BBC Radio 4 Plus, and there was a couple of days ago, well, a day ago, there was let me get my words out. There's a little miniature series, and it's about Column Man, and about a letter that was sent by a lady called Tina, who's paid by Tamsin Gregg, who does a lot of radio stuff. And she writes to the curator of the museum called Anders, who's paid by Paul Ritter. And there's this conversation back and forth, and it's a really nice little play on the radio because it talks about her wanting to see the bog body, and then the curator in the museum saying, there's this history and that history. And one interesting thing on today's episode, before I came on set, I listened to it, and it's only 15 minutes long, and it's BBC Radio 4 Plus, and it's called not BBC Radio 4 but Plus, and it's the series is actually called Meet Me at the Museum by Anne Youngson. And one interesting thing with this letter, and this was the perceived belief that they're trying to put this in context because this is broadcast in 2021, but Anne Youngson's letter, this is based about this is a communication by letter that and in one of the letters from the curator, Anders, he basically says, well, in Britain, in Norfolk, it was the only place in Britain where the men didn't dominate in Iron Age society, and it talks about work of Agricola and Tacitus, saying that women were slaves to men, and women were forced to sleep with 10, 20 men at a time and all these different things. Well, that attitude has changed now. We now start to look at Iron Age society in Britain where women dominated, and it was women who decided lots of these things. So it's rather interesting to see over time people's perceptions of history, and what we were once taught at school is very different from what we know now. And you can hear this if you compare this series on BBC Radio 4 Plus. You can get this on the Sounds app with the BBC, and you can compare with what I'm saying now with what they were saying a few years ago. And one of the sites that which we will be looking at today is actually in that series, and it's a site in Norfolk. And I thought, right, we're going to look at that today, as well as all the field patterns and stuff. So that was my inspiration. So anyway, anything from Judith?
No,
Judith?
no, thank you.
Oh, Judith, I know I bully you. Judith has given as good as she gets now. When I put a video out on YouTube, she's putting some strange comments on there.
Do you think they're strange?
Yeah, I love them. Keep doing it.
Cockerel again.
Right, so no, it's not Baldric. That's not a cockerel. I'm sorry. That's really disrespectful. That's my Baldric.
Oh.
You know, but Baldric knows and sees. You know, he still gets a song every night. But we got all these images here, and we're gonna go with here. And so what we've got an array. I'll just chip through a couple of images to start off with, and we look at aerial views of some of these Iron Age sites in a context of the landscape, and then we look at Warham Camp. Now, Warham Camp is discussed between these letters in this radio play. Meet Me at the Museum by Anne Youngmanson, and this is in Norfolk. And I thought that's a really nice place to discuss tonight as well, to sort of give us a bit of context within the landscape. Now, I've sort of given myself a little bit of freedom today by some of this stuff I don't have notes with. I just sort of flow. And the other stuff with Warham, I've got some really nice notes. And we go over to looking at, in regards to Iron Age Ridge and Furrow, we go to a location in Scotland, which is really good, called Drumturn. And that really portrays the Iron Age farming landscape. I don't have a lot in the way of Iron Age Ridge and Furrow, right? Lots of medieval ridge and furrow and sort of little things that I want to show you along the way. But let's get started. So one of the things that we think about the landscape is from what we can learn from aerial photography. And when we think about aerial photography, what we've got to do, we've got to think about the landscape of the past fitting within our modern landscape. And what I mean by that, you can have boundaries stretching underneath our boundaries and different bits and pieces, nothing linking. But we have seen a site in West Wales that a modern boundary follows an ancient boundary, an Iron Age boundary. So that was good, Bronze Age, Iron Age boundary. We don't clearly see that now. And I think this site itself, an image from historic England, and we've got the images coming up are from historic England. And the point is Iron Age landscape at Comerton. And what you can see is the way the landscape is divided into small patches. Some of these are agricultural farming patches of land where clearly what you've got is staining in the ground. So lots of the staining in the ground is usually associated with ditches. And we're not doing an aerial photograph lecture today as such, but the dark staining of the grass is because of ditches, because obviously the plant roots are going into the ditches and they're getting more nutrients and more phosphates. So the grass grows taller and stands out a lot more.
Odd change, Carl. I thought it more like strip farming or something.
Well, no. What we've clearly got is, for example, I'm just going to sort of ad lib a little bit on this, Roger. So we can clearly see that there is big enough for a field system, and you might be thinking about various sort of parcels of land that might indicate structures. And one thing that we clearly got within this landscape is early footpaths and trackways into areas where you might actually have your animals, which are corralled into these different areas. And this is one thing that I've learned farming myself, that sheep never seem to want to go where you want to take them. But one of the clear things, as much as we want to debate what we're looking at on the screen, is that this is an Iron Age stroke going into a Roman landscape. So Iron Age landscapes are very busy. There's a lot going on. There's lots of boundaries. There's lots of division. But when you think about that and you want to compare that, for example, with a medieval landscape, so say, for example, we get a medieval ridge and furrow landscape, we might be thinking about that being a medieval ridge and furrow landscape. The big difference between a medieval ridge and furrow landscape and something a lot earlier, which is back to here for example, is that our Iron Age and prehistoric ancestors had boundaries to contain their crops, right? And to contain what they're growing, because these people learned one thing quite quickly, right? And the point is this, right? Is that in the medieval period, for example, you could have open field systems like this without any boundaries around them, right? This is a modern landscape on an old medieval landscape, for example. And you don't need boundaries because there's not many sheep around. There's not many grazing ungulates around. So, but there is proof that there's grazing sheep and goats around, because they've got their landscape is very much divided within small parcels, so that they can grow certain crops there without them being interfered with by sheep and goats. Tell you what, right? One of my main worries at this time of year with our sheep is if one of our sheep gets out, just one, the entire hedge line that we've lovingly planted, right, could be wiped out in one chew, right? So you're talking about 500-600 saplings. Obviously, they're a year and a half old now. That could all be wiped out overnight. And the point is that these people in the past learned that, because obviously they're grazing animals need to graze, right? And they're going to graze everything. So you need walls, you need ditches, you need palisades to keep your crops away from the sheep and goats. And interesting enough, if you think about that context, maybe bringing something else in here. This is Hambledon Hill in Dorset, and you might think that maybe we don't get lots of proof that there's lots of buildings at these sites. Hambledon Hill is one of the exceptions. And you might think that the banks and ditches are there to actually keep the sheep out. I know this sounds absolutely bizarre and nuts, but it's not as bizarre and nuts as it sounds, because one of the things with this landscape is that your crop is your crop. You need that for next year. You need that for the following year. And Andy's point earlier on, when we're looking at 1,000 years ago, and we're looking at the did you say it was the west coast of the states, Andy? I think so. So we're looking at climate change. I could be told off for using that on YouTube, but changes in the environment in the past is that, you know, just the small changes, that 30% less rain can have a devastating effect on what you're growing. And what's going to happen is that's going to push animals on to graze what you're trying to grow. Having walls, having palisades and ditches around these things is very, very important. Now, what they're saying here, the one thing that is easy at this stage in the later Iron Age is that getting the Iron Age confused with the Roman era in Britain. There's not much difference in some parts of Britain. When you're reading the works of Julius Caesar, Cassius Dio, Pliny, any of these people, you usually get the idea that suddenly overnight. And you actually mentioned it. Was it Anne who mentioned it earlier on about Tacitus and Agricola? You mentioned that suddenly we're bought, or was it Margaret? You're bought into, you're enslaved by the Roman way of life, and this isn't exactly totally true in lots of areas of Britain, and if not the continent, where people continue to live within a small controlled landscapes rather than the big open landscapes that you might actually find in places like Wiltshire. This is Cornwall, for example, and it's just describing their settlements with ditches and banks. So very much when you try to look at this landscape, you've got to think about what else is around. The biggest threat at this stage is animals, not wolves. Wolves ain't going to eat your crop. But if again you get 2 or 3 sheep, a whole year's work is gone just like that. If sheep get into it, right? This is why you've got shepherds. And this is why you've got boundaries and defences around these different things. And again, it captions on these weeks of dry, hot weather. Again, English heritage image. Now, this again is Thurley, and of some images from 2011. And what you're talking about is an extremely complex landscape. And again, they're saying, Iron Age or Roman landscape. The thing is that doesn't look Roman at all, but it might be, because the point is that the Romans didn't conquer everywhere in Britain. They weren't in control of everything. It's a bit like, let me do a little bit of a metaphor. Okay, here's a little bit of a metaphor. In the medieval period, there were lots of witches around. There were lots of people involved in witchcraft. But people say that the medieval period in Britain was a time that it was completely Christian. It wasn't. Witches would go to church. They'd be lost and buried in society, and they'd move around, and they'd be wise men and wise women in society. So not the whole of Britain. Britain is not all Christian, right? It's the same as saying, the idea of Rome is something that you buy into. Rome is not forced upon you. You buy into it. It's the same. You've got 2 little children in a car. Anne and I ain't gonna buy them a McDonald's, right? But your 2 children say, we're gonna start crying unless we have a McDonald's, right? And that's the whole point. You're buying into this, and it's something that people were buying into. So this is very important when we think about the confusion between the Iron Age and what's going on in regards to the Roman world. The Iron Age and the Roman world looks very similar in some parts of Britain. This is what we're trying to say. So this is why when they're looking at Bedfordshire, of Thurley, for example, is this Roman? Is this Iron Age? It's likely both. It's an Iron Age landscape that's gone into a Roman landscape. And the only thing that's changed is people are told to use coinage, right? And there's nothing much changed. But you can clearly see that the ditches are these are not defensive ditches. These people are not going to be worried about being attacked or raped and pillaged, right? And you can clearly see indications of roundhouses there. And when you think about this as a plotted landscape, it's a bit like what's going to happen later on in the medieval landscape. The medieval landscape is more organized than the Roman and then the Iron Age landscape. The medieval landscape is very much organized, it's controlled. At that stage in the medieval period, the 11, 12, 1300s, you are controlled, you are part of society, you are slaves, right? I'm going to say it. You're slaves, you're set on the landscape. To use those words, that you buy into being enslaved by Rome. You're not actually all slaves themselves, but whatever you do, you start to use Roman coinage, right? That's control. We talk about control in modern day society. I've got to be very careful what I say, but obviously, politics is very controlling, right? With the taxes, that's very controlling. And I've taken part in a consultation today that is looking at that the only way post offices are going to continue in Britain is if there's an extra tax taxes come in to keep our post offices going, for example. I've part of that consultation today, and it's all part of buying in. You buying into this control, right? And this is what we're looking at. But at this stage, the Iron Age world is very much cluttered, right? Is very much mixed, right? This might be, for example, called the banjo enclosure, right? It might be a place that animals might go. It might be a place that you might plant crops. If animals go in there and the dung's on the surface, you're then going to plant crops. That's as simple as that. If you haven't noticed, something very, very subtle, right? If you haven't noticed something very subtle about this image, is what's in the middle. Hang on, not that. Look at that. There's a roundhouse in the middle, and the round and what's happened is I'm thinking that this might be nettles or something. Nettles like to grow within the phosphates. So in other words, there might have been a time that this area, there may have been a roundhouse there. Later on, they've decided to use it as a banjo enclosure. So in other words, animals are going in here, and then they're controlled with a ditch around the outside and a little bit of a wooden palisade and stones. And then what happens later on is that the dung created by these animals is basically that's where you're gonna actually plant your crops. So this is all looking at aerial photography. This is the Iron Age landscape. The problem is trying to find ridge and furrows within the Iron Age landscape is very, very difficult because they're very shallow. They're not as advanced as what we're looking at with ridge and furrow in the medieval period. So say for example, you might be talking about several centimeters. Where hang on, that's just wrong. You might be thinking about the medieval the Iron Age landscape might be quite rippling like that, right? And unfortunately, over time, that's all going to be leveled out to just a slight undulation like that, which isn't going to be really traceable in the archaeology unless you look at really high definition aerial photographs. The difference between again Iron Age ridge and furrow or rig and furrow, which is a Scottish term, and technically the word, as we said last week, ridge and furrow is associated specifically with the medieval period, but there were ridge and furrows in the medieval in the Iron Age and before. The difference is with the medieval landscape is quite acute. Medieval ridge and furrows would have been usually like this, right, with a ditch and like that, and they're like that. And usually what happens is that what happens is that usually there's a little bit of a survival of the medieval landscape, even if it has been ploughed out. And usually there's a point to be made with this, is that the reason why medieval landscapes have survived, and maybe not the Iron Age landscapes, is you've got the Iron Age. In the Roman period, the earlier Iron Age landscape is being ploughed out. In the Anglo-Saxon period, you've got all that stuff being ploughed out. In the medieval period, most of the evidence from before is being completely obliterated, right? Particularly in lowland areas. If you've got evidence of Iron Age stuff, stone divisions and stuff within landscapes, which we're going to talk about. That's going to survive in upland areas, but not in lowland areas where all the rich agricultural stuff is being exploited in the medieval period. What really happens is by about 1350, 1351, toward the end of the Black Death in Britain, the medieval landscape in lots of places is abandoned and it's left over to sheep grazing. Right, the reason why you have these very acute sort of medieval landscapes is because of the problem of drainage, right? Because the landscape's very wet in the medieval world, and there's a lot more rain and it's warmer than it is today. So when you get warm, you also get lots more rain. In the medieval landscape, it's very difficult to plant crops, right? So what you do, you create you create the lark ascendancy, so that your crops can actually grow on the top, and they're not going to die and get flooded, and they're not going to get blight and stuff. This is why you've got this medieval landscape. But after the Black Death, people are just replaced by sheep because they can't get the people to work on the landscape. So in other words, there's sheep grazing within the ridge and furrow landscape, and that's why this survived today, rather than the Iron Age landscape, which we're specifically talking about. Now, I thought I like, obviously this is a site in Dorset, but I like this where you've got a comparison between aerial photography and flooded landscapes. So I don't know if you can remember that in 2014 it was very wet, and in fact in Somerset the whole landscape's being flooded. You know, farms being inundated with water. You used to be able to see sandbanks around farms as the water level rose. This is in Cambridge in 2014, flooding of the Great Ouse River, and that's an Iron Age site. That's when the landscape's flooded. So you've got this sort of brushy, sort of marshy type landscape, which is typical for Cambridgeshire. But most of the time of the year, it's going to be dry, right? But it's by looking at aerial photographs and then looking at aerial photographs of a flooded landscape rather than a parched landscape. This is what we're actually getting at here. So what we can see, we can sort of aim towards understanding the landscape using various different parameters, i.e. aerial photography, and looking at aerial photography, whether it's parched or whether it's or whether the landscape's flooded. And again, you can see that it's saying again Tiso, Bedfordshire, and this is another site that they're really unsure whether this is completely Iron Age or there's a bit of Roman there. You can, but what it is when you've got a confused parcel of landscape like this. I've got a stone landscape to actually show you at Blind Wander tonight as well. So one of the things when you're looking at this, you can actually see it's really cluttered, it's disorganized, where people lived, where people farmed. Is this happening 100 years before the birth of Christ? Is this happening? Is there something happening 200 years before the birth of Christ, or is this happening after the birth of Christ? You know, so again, it's trying to get that and trying to look at the subtleties and understand this world of archaeology is very, very difficult unless you archaeologically excavate or actually do field walking. And one of the things that I was doing on the weekend was actually starting to cut into the ditch that we've got in West Wales associated with the site. So what I'm going to be doing is taking out a whole section of the ditch so we can actually see a section and then go all the way down and to try and get some dates for that. And the dates I do believe with that site are going to be a lot different when I've actually seen what we're actually looking at. And though anyone oh, by the way, we just sent out the new Holistic Pillar newsletter, which you should all get. And you've got a little bit of paper in there saying, you know, if you want to take part in the excavation in West Wales early next month. Again, June, Andy, remember June, first weekend in June. Then that information will be with you. So there's this site now which I want to go to. I'm very aware that we've got a few things to do tonight.
I've gone very good, Carl. I can't hear.
Hang on a minute.
Mm.
What? You've all been able to hear?
I say you seem to have gone very quiet. I don't know who else feels it. I'm not hearing you very well.
It was
Can you all
going
hear me,
quieter
guys?
and quieter, wasn't it? I
Yes,
thought it was
yes.
me.
No, I thought it was me too.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes, that's better.
A bit
that's much
better.
better. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's because Anne said something. Everything has changed. But you haven't missed anything, probably. You know, nobody's. You've all been able to hear me, yeah?
Yeah, just about.
Just about.
I don't know why that is. Hang on a minute. Okay, let's just see. Maybe Baldrick can get me an answer. Okay, here we go. Let's see if I can see anything wrong here. Sound. Mute. No, that's not. Well, I no, I don't know what. Right, okay. Anyone who doesn't hear me, then they need to just let me know, and just if the sound goes down.
Okay, thank you.
Right, okay, right, okay. Let's just crack on. Let's crack on. So, I don't know where I am now. Right, okay, here we go. Right, Warham Camp. Now, this is mentioned specifically in that play that I've mentioned. So, overlooking the impressive Iron Age earthworks of Warham Camp, very near the sea. So you've obviously got a river nearby as well. So this piece is based upon an archaeological excavation that took place at the site 2 years ago, and that's it. So so Warham Camp, it's very rare that we actually get archaeological excavations these days at Iron Age enclosures. This is in Norfolk, Iceni territory, Boudica territory. So you've got intriguing clues to the site's date. And obviously, one of the things that we do as archaeologists, we look at something, we can say, look, the banks and ditches. Actually, most people, the antiquarians used to say that these were Roman sites until this is why they're called forts. Until more recently, we know that this is an Iron Age bank and ditched enclosure or hill fort. So we've got the imposing twin earthworks, and obviously we should know by now that that's a multivalent site. If it's got one bank or ditch, it's a univalent site. So this isn't actually very much above sea level, only 15 meters. So it's not exactly high up, right? Now that's a really important thing to be talking about, right? It's not massively high up. It does not occupy a vantage point. So it's different and lots of bank and ditch enclosures. But then again, some of these hill forts are actually in the middle of valleys, at the bottom of valleys, right, or on the side of the hill. On this one, this is not. This is not. It doesn't occupy a fittingly defensive vantage point. It doesn't have sweeping views across its surroundings, which makes it very different. But then again, there are lots of other examples. Not all 5,000 hill forts. They're all built in different areas, probably associated with the same tribe um, that was led by Boudica or Boudicca or Buthig back in the around AD 60. Now, but this was built well before Boudica, and trying to get a precise chronology of lots of these archaeological sites is very, very important. And there we go. So what they're doing is to try and excavate the site, and what they've done. These are all trial pits. What they've done across the site is do some interesting trial pits within the interior of the site. And this is how we do archaeology. We can't excavate it all. It's too big an area to excavate it all. And this is how they've done it. So they've done these test pits, 21 test pits across the site to get an idea of the site's interior. Well, the excavation explored areas of its surrounding ditch. So when we think about examining an archaeological site, it's got to be done systematically like this. I was asked to do a field evaluation at a site near Bridgend in South Wales, a place called Pyle, and the owner said, right, I'm going to give you a digger, right? There's just you, and I want you. I said we'll dig 15 holes across the site to try and get an idea. There was nothing across the site at all. It was all alluvial stuff, right? But these people are excavating the site by hand. It's a scheduled protected ancient monument. So, and interesting enough, there's possibly 6 of these forts in Norfolk. It's a big area. When you think about it, it's 5,000 hill forts across Britain. There's not that many in Norfolk. Why? But lots of Norfolk is going to be a flooded landscape. It's been changed quite a lot. And this is the best preserved of all of them. And the one thing about this is that, you know, this site has been looked after. It's been loved. It's been cherished. And there's the archaeologists doing these trial pits. It's been appreciated. And this is how archaeology should be looked at. So today the monument's interior appears as a sea of empty grass. And the lady in this TV series, it's she talks about, not TV series, radio series. She talks about the site that when she stood there, she felt very connected, and lots of these places do have a sense of connection. So, but over the course of the last 90 years, archaeologists have been striving to shed light on how the site evolved and how it may have been used. The last excavation was in 1959 under Roundbird Clark, and then an earlier one under a guy under the name of Harold St. George Gray in 1914. He's the same guy who excavated the lake villages at Glastonbury and Mere. So when they originally excavated here in 1959, they revealed that the fort's surrounding banks had once been crowned by a tall timber palisade with a wooden platform to the rear. Not sure how they worked out that there's a wooden platform, but that's something else. Both excavations produced pottery attesting to Iron Age and Roman activity taking place within the bounds. This is a really important point, that lots of these sites, when you move from the Iron Age into the Roman period, continue to be used and utilized in one way or another in the Roman period. What we usually find with these sites in the Roman period is that the Romans basically say, right, it's not going to be used for storing grain anymore. It's not going to be used for anything else other than you, a local family can move in there, maybe the one that was already running the show. And what happens is that it becomes a farm, an enclosed farm, you know. So rather interesting with this site as well. And this also come up in the TV, in the radio series. It says further fragments have been recovered as stray finds in more recent years after being brought to light by not archaeologists, but by resident populations of moles and rabbits. What those activities were, however, remain obscure. So again, when you're thinking about doing test pits across this site, you're really starting to get a good ilk about what's going on. So archaeologists 2 years ago were excavating at the site, Cambridge Archaeology and University of East Anglia, and so on. And also a study of Japanese arts and culture excavated at this site. Don't ask. Right, so what we've got with lots of these sites, one thing that we really need to remember when focusing on these sites and understanding these sites, they've been used for an incredible long period of time. Now, you can clearly see that there's signs of entranceways, a few entranceways, more than one, you know, from what we can work out. And what we usually find is that these sites may have actually, lots of them, you know, Maiden Castle is a good example, started off as causewayed enclosures, which is basically an open area in the middle, which you would have had a wooden platform, and you'd have exposed bodies there, you'd have sky burials. And the point is, this site probably teased and started out as a Neolithic landscape, right, which was for burial. Right, so this is what they're sort of finding out, and they're understanding this through modern investigations, looking at the various different stages, looking at the taste of the archaeological research from modern day and age. The problem is the problem is when we're looking at archaeology like this, right? When we're trying to understand archaeology like this, what we've got to do is that we've got to retest what the archaeologists of the past were saying. So in 1959, they probably thought it was Neolithic activity. What we've got to do is we've got to re-excavate it now, and to try and really understand the history of the site by looking at using modern technology. Fortunately, the west side of the site, you can clearly see that you've got a river there, which is the river Stiffery. That's rather interesting because what's happening is the river's moved, and over time it's eroded the south western corner of the site. And there have been moments where people have deliberately damaged the site within the 1700s. And if we move on to the next image, which is this one, this is getting people really interested in archaeology, trying to sort of devise an understanding of the archaeology. So what we're doing is getting groups of people, 23 people under actually 24 trenches were actually dug across the site, and the ones in the middle are 21, and some on the ditches and bank, and actually looks like there's 26 actually, and basically provoking questions. Now, one thing that we really do wish to really understand these sites a lot better, and I got to be honest with you, we're still asking questions about lots of these sites. Warham Camp may have provoked questions, may have provoked more information. But again, when you're looking at archaeology, when you're looking at ditches, when you're understanding what's going on, archaeologists have got to work in awkward situations. So here we go. Even in July, when they were excavating this site, the water table as they're actually excavating in ditch here, you can see all the different layers, you know, all the carbonized layer there, you know, all these different layers with the ditch. And again, thinking about this and understanding what's going on with the archaeology, these ditches may have actually had water in them. Well, obviously they did, because this is even in July, you know, the ditches are actually flooded. So what they're doing is when we're looking at a site like this, you've got a truncated history, and because you know you've got Neolithic, you've got Bronze Age, you've got Iron Age, and you've got Romans. It was all mixed up. You know, nobody's taking any notice of what's going on before that. And again, what they're doing is looking and understanding various features in the ditches. Ditches are great places to find things. You know, you can recover organic samples, and you know the rate. You know, for example, look at that. You know, that's a great organic layer. And looking in these ditches and really trying to understand, sort of trying to get what's going on. And then as they're excavating back on drier land rather than the ditches, on the rather drier ground of the fort's interior, contents of all the test pits were carefully sieved and recorded. I love sieving. You know, when I was managing an excavation in South Wales, we actually got somebody to make a sifting machine, which was on a triangle, and you rocked it back and forth. We didn't need people to juggle like this, you know. So we just rocked it back and forth. It was a great little machine. Now our little great ridded sifting machine. So the bulk of finds recovered throughout the centre of the fort, our wonderful site, were a mix of Iron Age stuff, and then they started finding Roman stuff as well from the 2 and the 300s, including hobnail boots and 12 Roman coins, which could have been lost by casual or more purposely visitors to the site. And visitors to the site in the Roman period, yes. Can you imagine? Just think about this a moment. These places existed at the time of the Romans, right? And the Romans, like us, were very curious. And can you imagine they would have looked at this? I'm trying to, yeah, sorry, couldn't get the image there. The Romans would have looked at this, and this would have been complete there. The river itself hadn't have taken away the banks. The Romans would have been curious, and that's why maybe the coins were there. And obviously, was it a little farmstead? And all these different questions come up. And what they've got is that there's lots of long-term activity. And you know, it's trying to get that sort of imbued sense of history coming to us, speaking to us, and letting us understand. And this is what we've got is, if we want to chuck this in with the likes of the overall Iron Age and the Iceni and the Romans, and go in with all that. They've got evidence of metal working at the site as well. So they're still trying to find evidence of something more permanent. And it's quite odd that even though you might be thinking of this being used in the Roman period or whatever, and it's some sort of internal farmstead, or maybe that, yes or no. Listen to this, rather interesting, this point, and this takes us away from what these sites that we know about these sites, what they were used for. So there's no sign of a permanent structure associated with this site, and this is quite odd. And with this site in particular, even though we've got blacksmithing activity at the site, they're really trying to understand what's going on. And there's no evidence of medieval activity, only evidence from the 1800s of ploughing. So again, putting all this into context and understanding this and looking at these ditches, and again, there we go. The muddy area beyond this trench lies outside the bounds of Warham Camp, and they've obviously the river Stiffkey, and when we think about this, not actually finding much in the way of structures within this site, which is quite odd. Could it have been just a giant place to keep sheep or goats or cattle, or you know, this is one real weird thing about this site. It's a donut thing, you know, with banks and ditches. It's great. So while many other southern hill forts like Maiden Castle and Danebury are peppered with the remains of roundhouses, other features hinting at more established occupation, Warham Camp's interior, oh, look at that there, remains curiously sterile. So they're not finding the usual, you know, post holes, and there's no way that they could have missed the post holes in all those trenches, because it could be some might all be tucked around the edge or something, but they haven't found them, which is really odd. So like the Roman finds, all the Iron Age material recovered from the team has come from the topsoil rather than any features cut into the chalk, and these items are even fewer in number, comprising fragments of pottery and a decorative button and loop toggle for a cloak. And this latter find is potentially significant. However, it is adorned with coral. But coral, wow! In the Iron Age, coral, probably coral from the Mediterranean, in a way reminiscent of some of the grave goods from Wet Wang, up in Yorkshire, carrier burials. Domed studs, strips, and inlays of coral have been used to decorate horse fittings like turrets, rain rings, as well as women's brooches. So what they're going to do, they need to look at this site a little bit more in detail. But again, the whole point of this is to give you another site to take you somewhere else, in Norfolk, for example. And it's basically saying the contents of the 21 pits were carefully sieved to recover any small finds that might shed light on what the site has been used for. Do you know what? Right, I got a confession. When we had one of these on site, right, we had like a big triangular rocker thing, and I can remember we had where we were excavating outside Bridgend, we had a group of metal detect enthusiasts turn up once, and they said, "Oh, can we metal detect over your site?" And I said, "Nope." "Oh, and why are you being like that?" And I said, "I don't have metal detecting on my archaeological sites. Don't approve of it." Anyway, I said, "Right, I'll give you a challenge, right? I bet you that my sifting and my excavators are so good, you won't be able to find a single artifact from that sift soil over there." And guess what? They didn't find a single thing. That's how I do archaeology. We found everything from the site through sifting, and this is. But sifting is so monotonous. You can't do it in the winter months because the soil is just too claggy and stuff, and everything gets stuffed up. You can only do it in the you can only do it in summer months. So there they go, excavating more of their squares. And again, this is on a schedule protected ancient monument. So you can't just go in there digging away. But again, more of this test pits. We used to hear a lot about this in regards to the likes of Time Team. Although the fort must have taken considerable effort to build, none of the test pits produced any evidence of permanent or even significant occupation. I've got to be honest and mind my expletives. This is bloody odd, because this is really strange. Because what is this? You know, there's a little bit of metal working there. You know, bits of pottery, bits of this. You know, bits of sort of maybe burial evidence and stuff. What is this site? And again, if there was a Roman site year settlement there, you know, let's try and find it. And there's coins there. Maybe we know, for example, that the Romans visited Stonehenge as a tourist attraction. When you think about it, the Romans are in Britain, say 100 years AD 100. A group of people go to Stonehenge. Stonehenge would have been, some of Stonehenge would have been 3,500 years old when the Romans saw it. Some of those stones have been standing at Stonehenge for over 3,000 years, or just under 3,000 years at Stonehenge. So no reason why this site couldn't have been a curiosity. I just decided to chuck these in here. So Robert Fairclough's sketches documenting the latest work at Warham Camp. It does look like something very, very odd from, but these are archaeologists working on site, getting very busy, like it. There they are, sifting the soil, getting into there. So what we are going to do now, we're going to, I think, we'll do that in a minute. Right, we'll do that in a minute. So we just want to shut down there, Warham Camp, to just give you a nice bit of something on this site. And do you know what? I've had this on my phone for a long time, and I thought ancient toys. And this is actually from ancient toys from the Iron Age. And a few interesting points for this. It's often easy to forget that the characters we read about in the Bible and in the history books are real people and lived much like we do today. Even the children of the ancient world loved to play and had toys like that wheeled object there. Okay. And actually, I think they would have been wooden wheels, but the wood hasn't survived, so they've done a reconstruction on that one. Even the children of the ancient world loved to play and had toys like the wheeled bear, an otter from the early Iron Age, dating to about 900, 1000 years before the birth of Christ. And site known as Shemesh, as well as dolls made of bone and clay and board games with dye. So the point is that this the Iron Age, and there's another point here that the Iron Age in the Holy Land is earlier than our Iron Age by about 500 years, and because it got iron before us. But I just want to put that point in there. So what we're going to do? There we go. And you know, I had that image on there for Margaret. This is Rusty, our Iron Age dog. Remember Rusty, our pet dog? I had to chuck that him in there. We're loving him lots. Right. So what we are going to do now, we're going to take a bit of a break. And oh my God, oh no, oh my fiddlesticks! Look at all the stuff I still got to do. Oh no. We're not going to get through all that tonight. No way. I want to finish just past 9 because, yeah, life. Never mind. Life. La 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 la.
Right.
Okay then. Right, Rog. Right. You know we love you, Rog. Is there anything you want to say, Rog?
Well, it's just one question that might be something or nothing, but on that Warham site with multi-ballot, you said the river had moved onto the one side.
Yeah,
it could be, but possibly was it built that way to get an extra defense, some form? Maybe, I don't know. How do you prove that river had moved?
There is one point that there is proof to say that the river was in a different location in the Iron Age. But obviously,
how are we sure? I don't get it.
they've surveyed the landscape. It's a matter of it's lots of courses of streams and rivers move, and one or two Roman forts in Britain. From my little series on the Roman stone remains in Britain, what you see is chunks of the forts eroded away by rivers, for example.
Well, yeah.
And
sampling.
and yeah, and you can core sample across the landscape. So, for example, let me work. There is a notation here saying that they have had a look at the landscape, and they have seen that the river has gradually moved over time. But the point is, with or without that, the point is that the landscape would have been quite boggy anyway. And being that we've got water flooding the trenches today, you know, it's quite interesting. That's an interesting one, that we've got a hill fort that there's water in the ditches. You know, and any medieval self-respecting castle would love water in its ditches. You've seen the Hollywood films; that's what it's based upon. But lots of water wasn't in these ditches. But actually having water in these ditches is fact at this place rather than fiction.
I was thinking as a last point that the ditch's depth, if it was to stop animals getting in and out, they would be shallower than a sort of defensive fort for military use.
Again, the point is we don't have any evidence that there's been any sign of any military thing at all with this site, and it's
even sort of like rustling or something, not just a military battling. Just a thought, you know.
Different ways of looking at this. Thanks, Roger. Anything from you, Judith?
No, it's just more mystery, isn't it?
Oh, come on, we won't have too much mystery after the break. We you know.
Okay, we're gonna have some conclusions, are we?
We did have Rusty the dog after all.
Yes, that's true.
Talking about Richard and Emma, anything you want to say?
Do you want to say anything, Dad?
Oh, me? No.
No, that's fair enough. Emma, keep the fan club going. Margaret.
I'm trying.
Well, you're up to 14 big fans of mine by now, so there we go. Margaret's one of them. Anyway, Margaret, anything you want to say?
Well, I guess a hill fort is a bit of a misnomer because they're not always on hills, are they? As you can see,
exactly, and they're not forts either in most cases. You know, I don't know who was writing it. I don't know which antiquarian worked out that these were Roman forts, because they're round for a start. You know what I mean?
What's the difference?
Not all Roman forts are square and rectangular, but most of them are.
Yeah. I forgot what I was going to say. What's the difference between a ditch and a dike? And be careful.
Oh, hang on a minute. You've got, there's a problem there, right? Because dikes in different parts of the Britain are actually banks. In other parts of the Britain, they're ditches, right? So this is a very. So what are you talking about? A ditch or a bank?
Both here.
No, I'm thinking of a dike.
Oh, they're both, exactly. So
for collecting water, rainwater.
When I went to Orkney, there was a bank, and a woman called it a dike.
No.
Offers dike.
Yes, and there was no ditch. There you go.
There's Offers dike.
Actually, hang on a minute. Offers dike. It's a bank and a ditch.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In some areas, it's a bad woman. In some other areas, it's a ditch in the ground.
So is a ditch always round in the Iron Age?
No, not necessarily. No.
And is the dike always long and straight?
No, they're not. No. Get that out, yeah. Good, fair enough. Right. Okay then. Anyway, thanks for that, Margaret. Anything from you, David?
No, thank you.
Trina?
No, thank you.
Andy?
I find these field systems really difficult to understand, because you get a snapshot now in 2025 of what could be you know, 500 years of ditches and, you know, enclosures and things, and trying to work out which ones were there first without excavating, just looking at the pictures, the plan views, is
And some
so
ditches
difficult.
were used over time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And it's really confusing, you know, what they use them for. And some of them are so extensive as well. Like it's that one of the ones you were showing with really big ditch or big marks in the ground. So whether they were up or down, I don't know. But and they're thinking, why did they build them so big? You know?
Yeah.
Obviously, irrigation is really important within a landscape. So obviously,
yeah,
this is one of the things in archaeology. Not exactly saying that all ditches. Right, okay. We've established this now. Ditches are not necessarily defensive. Ditches can be for drainage. You might have a ditch around the house to take the water off the roof. You know, all these different things. All these different things that we're thinking of.
Yeah.
I
Right,
bet they smelt. I bet they were very smelly.
Well,
might not have been.
Might not have been.
They would have been.
Hey, don't forget this was
Reens are a similar thing. They're always flooded, but
matriarchal society. Don't forget.
Oh no! In this
matriarchal.
Book,
it's women. It's all these dykes.
In this Tacitus book, Tacitus.
He does
say that we didn't differentiate between men or women being in charge. He does say that in his book.
Right.
I didn't go any further with that, Andy. Did you notice that was good?
Yeah.
Nobody spotted it.
No.
Right, Anne.
Well, although it's a little throwaway, a little bit, I was impressed at the sophistication of the toys.
Oh yes, and I think if I can remember right, in Incan society we've got there are toys with wheels.
Yeah.
In fact, you're thinking, well, they didn't have wheel transport because they didn't need it, and you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, there's something not quite right with you. Yeah, there are one or two Incan toys with wheels, and you're thinking, but they did have wheels. No,
Yeah.
they didn't.
I thought you said they were reconstructed,
you see?
rotten or something.
But maybe they were imported from China, you see. You know, there was no tax and, you know, there was no Donald Trump back then, and that makes sense.
No tariffs, yeah.
Yeah, Lloyd George didn't put tariffs on things, Andy.
No. He knew better.
No.
Yeah. Right, okay, guys. It's now 8:23. I want to be back at
8:15.
8:34.
Jolly good.
Right. Okay. See you. Oh.
Shut up, Rod. Shut up. Not interested.
Okay.
I'm not, Rog, I'm not interested. Shut up.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, all right. Yeah. Oh.
Nobody knows what he's on about. He's just like a blithering idiot half the time.
Yeah, that's me. Oh. What?
Anyway, how did you meet your missus? He's not telling us, is he? See, he's gone. I got to take a break myself.
Yeah.
Right, cup of tea.
Oh yeah. Got some coffee.
Hold on a second.
Ah.
Can't do this.
Okay. Good. Oh. Thank you. Good. Oh, it is. Good evening. Up. Oh.
Lucy's had great fun. Lucy's had great fun. She got on the seat, jumped over Jeanette's, disappeared, walked around there, back over there, scratching on the top panel, came back. She was behind me when I was cutting the earlier. And then she looked like the apple tree.
You call it up?
Yeah.
That's what he moved.
And then slumped down onto the roof. I thought, the hell's that? And then Teddy's come. So you nice, called him Teddy Bear, and then he moved. So that yellow rose behind the bush got 5 flowers on it.
Good. Well, surprised you did the bush. Yeah.
So what did he say about your vine?
Well, not interesting.
I hope he's top of it, getting the ladders that way. But I changed some little painful. During the top of the pink bush where it was not variegated, trim back the fuchsia that's now spiced out and have a go at the azalea.
Anyway, that. You've been in Norfolk and Cambridge.
Yeah.
With settlement. And of course, Dorset Cambridge.
Is it?
What Big Hill Force there.
Yeah.
Handle Hill or something.
Anderson Hill. Yeah, we bought that. It's like that, and then let's sleep. Anderson Hill, yeah. Walk that. I'll do it again. Yes. Walking like that. You're walking like that, very steep, handsome hill.
Yeah.
Mm.
So she'd been having great fun.
Yeah,
Not very helpful,
every kitchen she'd had put. I opened a new packet, 3 weeks and put 4 for light, so she had those. So she had a little couple.
Was she coming in the kitchen and shutting off?
No, she wasn't playing with them. She's playing behind, she's behind the, so she's up in the pear tree and she jumped down from there. Next time I looked round, she's up the thinking apple tree.
She monkeyed off, but so she's not monkeying.
Then Teddy came, I said, "Did you tell you to come over? You were so keen if he wouldn't move." And I said, "Teddy bear," and you moved, so that's obviously what we saw him, Teddy bear.
No. Oh, wow. Whoa. Who was that?
Essie had by the back door a plant that looked like a nettle. Essie had a hot plant by the back door with a nettle. I said, "Isn't that a nettle?" And Ray said, "I keep telling her it's a nettle," but she said, "You keep feeding it to see if it can, if it's pretty. So you make nettle soup if you want." Oh,
Oh. The dead sheep.
he's had a dead sheep.
Well,
He's had a dead sheep.
sheep. Yeah, sheep. Buried it.
Wait, what?
Buried it.
They buried it.
We were there. Tell us. So, yeah. Still, I get on with it now. That little garden with his alcoves, you can put it in Princeton or something. Colleges or something. Like they're doing, you know, these niches. A feature of that. Painted in marble.
Always been penny up. It wants painting. Oh, I'll sit down. I'll do it now. Sorry.
Are you still going walking, Anne?
Yes, I'm going on Thursday for with the walking group. Yeah.
Oh, where will you be going?
Oh, it's just look at some flowers somewhere. I don't know, I can't remember the name of the place. But
Your volume's very loud, by the way.
It's blasting away.
It's really, really loud.
is it? I was when I couldn't hear, I went back into it to try and turn volume up, thinking that would.
Yeah.
I'll do something about it. I don't know if I can do it now.
Yeah, it's definitely.
I think you turn your microphone up and not the speaker. Yeah.
Yeah.
Paul went very quiet and you went deafening.
I'll see if I can get back to it.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So, very good. Oh, So everybody's well, yeah.
Yeah. Do
No
you go
problem.
walk? Do you
Well,
go
you know,
out?
nothing much has changed in like 15 minutes, Rog.
Yeah.
You know, it's like oh, like it's like a goldfish, isn't it? You know, hiya, Fred. Yeah. All right. Yeah. 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 It's like that
What?
Monty Python thing. Yeah. All right, Fred. Yeah. Goldfish goes around. All right, Fred. Yeah. Do that all day.
What's that about?
Anyway, let's crack on. All right, Fred. Right.
What's in
Are we
there?
back?
Oh,
Are we
If I
back now?
if I should suddenly leave connection, I'll come on via the other doodah. Right. Anyway, so let's crack on.
pocket back.
Is that better?
Unfortunately, my 2 hour journey tonight, I've got to go to a McDonald's, sadly. Oh
What?
my God, I am so, why have I got not, yeah, anyway, right. So let's just crack on with this. So what we've got is typically, if this was a medieval ridge and furrow, rather than an Iron Age one, that gives you an idea of both types. So what we've got is this has been ploughed out, and this has been leveled. But what you might find is that there's staining within a landscape, or if this is what it looks like today, you might
Mhm.
find a little bit of the ridge surviving, when in fact, initially, in a medieval context, it would have been something like that. So this sort of gives you a bit of an annotation of how we think of this and how they've survived. I think it's quite amazing that we get any agricultural activity surviving at all. And we don't get modern agricultural activity surviving because the machines create really deep ditches when you're plowing across a landscape, and then it's harrowed out, and the plants are placed in, and it's harrowed out, and it's all level, right? So you know, modern agricultural equipment. But again, thinking about this, and there we go. You can tell that at one time this was a medieval ridge and furrow. It was a meter tall, and the furrows there, and this is called a section, right? So the way I'm going to be doing my to get a section of the ditch in West Wales is I'm going to be doing something like this, so we can actually read the layers either side, and then we can get an idea of reading the layers in the ditch, and if there's any dating evidence in there, can we read like a pages in the book? So if we get something at the bottom of the ditch that is X date, and then something in the middle is another date, and you can read that like a book. So again, it's similar with ridge and furrows. So obviously dating ridge and furrows is based on that this was a typical way that they did things in the medieval period, not the Iron Age. So I wanted to chuck this in here. This is an article that I picked up online. So historical classification of ridge and furrow cultivation at selected locations in northern and central Germany, using a multi-dating approach and historical sources. Very complicated stuff there, 2020. But the main thing is trying to look at this surface, trying to use some dating techniques. So what we've got to do when we look at ridge and furrow, when we're not necessarily finding artifacts in them, we might use radiocarbon dating evidence. Again, looking at a section like this in the ridge, there might be evidence in there, and in the furrow, which is the ditch, there might be evidence in there. So the various different dating techniques, we will find the odd bit of pottery in there, but it's unlikely. But in the medieval period, what we do find is that they're muck spreading a lot in the medieval period. So anything broken coming out their house is usually put in the muck pile, and is spread on the landscape in the medieval period. We also get this in the Roman period. We get this in the Iron Age period, where we've got muck spreading. It definitely does happen in the Iron Age and the Roman period, muck spreading. So this is why we get bits of pottery across a field. Sometimes we get an archaeologist, they say, oh, why have we got a bit of Iron Age pottery in the field? It's because there's an Iron Age house under the surface. It's not that at all. The Iron Age house might be 20, 30, 40, 100 meters away, and it's muck spreading in the field. The difference is with muck spreading in the Iron Age with, say, for example, the medieval period, you have to pay for your own SHIT and your animals done, right? you used to have to give it to the reeve in the reeve's yard, and there's a big pile in the reeve's yard. So when it comes to muck spreading, you would go to the reeve and say, actually, here's a sheep for my own muck that I'm going to spread on my field. So that's the medieval system. In the Iron Age system, probably very, very different. And obviously, dating results suggest ridge and furrow cultivation is as early as the 600s, 600s, AD 600. So what we've got is the results indicate a usage period up until the modern period, although continuous use is unlikely. There is a point with this that that we do find that they are doing a little bit of ridge and furrow still in the Napoleonic period, about 1800. So it's rather interesting. With this site that we're briefly looking at in York, so ancient village names, various other evidence, historical documents, maps, and dating give us an idea of various different landscapes. In regards to a British landscape, in regards to a Germanic landscape, obviously we've got the authors there. Central Germany. What's going on in Central Germany, dating the landscape, and what's going on within our landscape is very, very similar. It's very similar medieval landscape. So again, what we can understand is that it's a controversial way of examining the landscape, because as Andy said, not everything is out there. Stuff is very confusing. There's a combination of stuff going on in the landscape, and this wonderful thing of using thermal luminescence dating. And with thermal luminescence dating, for example, the technique thermal luminescence dating is that when, for example, get rid of that, that's the original surface horizon. Yeah. So what might be is that down there, the last time that was exposed to luminescence from the sun, for example, that date we can precisely record, right? So say, for example, the ridge was created on the 14th of October at 12:15 in the year 900, right? Obviously it's not going to be that precise, but we can get an idea by the luminescence. Luminescence is trapped in the ground, right? And then as you uncover that, the luminescence is then it's basically thermal luminescence. It's radiation, the amount of radiation stored in that layer, and then you can count that when it was last exposed to the sun. So these wonderful techniques that we've got in archaeology really help us assess what's very much in the ground. So moving on a little bit further. So what we've got is, again, this is definitely not what a Iron Age ridge and furrow system was, but again, it gives you an idea of what ridge and furrow was like throughout most of the periods. And obviously, there you go. The water is applied to the land through a series of long, narrow channels called furrows. When it says applied to the land, that's where there's a different way of looking at this, actually. Some on some landscapes, for example, if you look at the Middle East, you have a similar ridge and furrow system where you've got a ditch. Oh, this is when the River Nile, for example, floods. What the farmers have already done, they've already set out the ridge and furrows in the landscape. So what happens? The water then channels down the furrows, right? And you've got a rich sort of alluvial damp soil that then anything which is planted on the ridge will be able to obtain the rich moisture which is in the furrow, which is then absorbed by the mound itself. But the crop isn't flooded. The whole point of planting on the ridge is that the crop is not flooded, right? So it's raised, so it's not going to get the bacteriums and all the rest of it, which is going to kill off the seedlings, and it's not going to as you know, with a greenhouse, if you water your plants too much, then they're going to die. It's the same process. So I know I've shown you this before. This is a typical mixture of a medieval landscape, but there is something to be learned within the Iron Age landscape. This is Bruchton Gifford village, which is actually near the likes of York. Now, Broughton, and there's another Broughton near Leicestershire, for example. What you can see is the ridges and in all different directions and so on. But it's quite likely that there's actually an Iron Age landscape here as well, because you might be squinting your eyes and thinking, right, this over here. Oh, hang on a minute. This over here might be an Iron Age area, an Iron Age landscape. That might be Iron Age landscape as well, where you've got these higgledy-piggledy divisions. But when you actually come down to the medieval world, then things are more sort of organized, because obviously they don't need their walled little gardens in the medieval period, unlike the Iron Age period. Because the ridges and the furrows are good enough, and you don't have all these grazing sort of ungulates, all these sheep and goats going across the landscape. So again, LiDAR image looking at this site at Broughton. And again, you can slightly see that here. So if you go again, understanding ridge and furrow is comparing with the medieval period and the Iron Age again, lots of the ridge and furrows, for example, at Castlereagh, are actually, that's the medieval landscape. But what you might see if you squint your eyes going up in upland areas, for example, at oh God, that place near Millom, what you've got is that you've got an Iron Age landscape there, where you do have these undulations that are quite slight, but you do have this Iron Age landscape near Millom. And again, back to Yorkshire, back to the medieval landscape, ridge and furrow is a feature of how the land was worked in the Middle Ages. And there's a point to be made here. The large common fields were worked in narrow strips, and the whole point with that is that it was an open landscape with these narrow strips, with no hedges and banks. So in the Iron Age, there were small areas. They were small managed landscapes. So obviously the medieval period there, the a furlong length, 220 yards, that's what you'd have ploughed, and there would have been strips. There would have been strips alongside that in parallel lines, which is typically each of these parallel lines, 220 yards in length, and each of these would have been managed by a family, each of these lengths. But again, when you're going to compare, I don't know what, if you're going to compare this with an Iron Age landscape, it's a parcel of land. And in the Iron Age, it wasn't a controlled landscape as we got in much later periods. And again, this is typically showing you what's going on is that the water and substance runoff, and obviously not to flood what you've got planted there. Obviously, giving you an idea of what's going on. This is an archetypal way. Hang on a minute. Archetypal way of looking at the ridge and furrow system. For example, in places, if you want to look at Wiltshire and Hampshire and all the way over to the likes of Norfolk, and then different parts of the country, you would have different ways of farming to suit. Again, in upland areas, what we usually find is in upland areas, we don't find the medieval ridge and furrow systems. We find the Iron Age ridge and furrow systems, because by the medieval period, by the time you're looking into the height of the medieval period into the 1200s, much of the upland areas have already been abandoned way years ago. And hence, if you do find slight ridge and furrows in upland areas, very likely that they're Iron Age rather than medieval. Now, the interesting point here, it mentions Napoleonic ridge and furrow, and this is more mechanized. So the 1800s, you got this medieval landscape on the left, and you got ridge and furrow on the right, which is extremely mechanized. So organized lines, you can only do that with sort of a wheeled plow. And as things start to move on into the modern agrarian way of ploughing in later years. Again, look at these ridge and furrows, again, near Yorkshire. And you see that there. This is atypical of how a ridge and furrow landscape worked, because you can clearly see if the crops are in the middle on the ridge, they're not going to be flooded out. And you've got flooded landscape. So this is ideal, usually really good for clay landscapes. And typically ridge and furrow is going to be good for clay landscapes, for example, Cumbria, clay landscapes, for example, in South Wales, and places like Norfolk up near Yorkshire. That's sort of a limestoney like landscape as well. So ideal because very clay, clay soils are not really good for when it's contaminated with lots of water. So the ridge itself is the way you go. And obviously people would have learned this way back in the prehistoric period as well. And there it is. This is near Hobmore, which is near York itself. And again, looking at these open landscapes to try and find earlier landscapes. Now this is back to the Iron Age, and we've got a nice little piece here. And this is a really nice piece. This is published by Scarf, which is the Scottish archaeological resources, and this is what this is based upon. So the Iron Age, so the landscape that we're going to look at is, where is it? Perth and Kinross, right? So this is what we're going to look at. Drumturn. Before we exactly get to Drumturn, let's just sort of get a little bit of an idea. We mentioned Cumbria there as well. So I've shown you this image a few times, the open field system. So this is an open field system rather than being enclosed. In fact, there were even in the Iron Age they had open systems, and that would indicate there's no sheep around. Right, so in this Iron Age landscape, this open field system at Hutno in Scotland, we know there's no sheep or goats around because it's an open system. There's going to be nothing grazing, so you don't need to put arduous walls and banks around things, right? So you can have an open system like the medieval period. They're usually unlikely, right? They usually banks and ditches around these things, that say, to keep the sheep out. But here, this is a good indicator that they don't have the sheep grazing across the landscape. So we can get an idea of what they're eating, because if this is an open landscape in the Iron Age, there's no sheep grazing, so therefore they're not eating lamb. So again, looking at the landscapes gives you a clue about what's going on. So again, if it's enclosed landscape in the Iron Age, they got sheep and goats. If it's unenclosed, it means that they haven't got sheep and goats. Interesting enough, in the medieval period, again, there's the comparison in the medieval period. When you've got the medieval period, you don't have loads of sheep and goats until the Black Death, and then suddenly sheep and goats are introduced on the landscape. So it's open field system in the medieval period. It can be grazed upon by the sheep because there's no crops being planted anymore. Warren Percy, nobody grows any crops at Warren Percy up north. That's again near York. So Warren Percy itself, that's an open grazed landscape until the Black Death of when it's hitting that area by 1349, 1350. And then that open landscape itself is no longer farmed, ploughed. It's not doing what it used to do. And now it's being grazed upon sheep. So what we've got is the open system was divided between a number of cultivators who could move easily between holdings. Is that similar to the medieval period or not? It was physically subdivided by narrow cultural ridge known as cord and rig. So we get away with instead of using ridge and furrow in the Iron Age, the term we usually in Scotland we call it the cord and rig system. Basically a cord, a length, and a rig, cord and rig system. So I made this point earlier on, so it's pointless me talking too much about it now, but obviously vast changes within the landscape that we have in the Iron Age. And just read this: Bronze and Iron Age defences at Hambledon Hill, Dorset, encircle the remains of Neolithic causewayed enclosures going way back that overlook substantial pastures below. In autumn, when transhuman flocks, basically the movement of animals back and forth in herds, were rounded up for the return journey. seasonal gatherings were held within the enclosures, whose earthworks were periodically refurbished, even where they had become so degraded that they would barely have been visible to the naked eye and could only have been identified by oral tradition. That's going on from early prehistoric times all the way into the Iron Age. And again, it might be that you're going to take animals to a location like this on the landscape. This is where you're going to store the grain, as we mentioned before. Or maybe this is where you're going to plant crops. Perfect area to plant crops. And when you think about it, right, this is going to sound nuts, folks, but just go with it. Just go with it. We haven't always got evidence of palisades and stone walls around the tops of these banks. This is going to sound crazy, but what about planting crops around on these banks? They would be perfectly drained. You've got the ditches. Just leave that there. Just an idea. So I don't know if this is a familiar locality to you guys up in Cumbria, but this is Munsgridale Common, Cumbria. I've no idea where that is in Cumbria, but I'm sure one of you can tell me. The quality and character of rough common grazing on extensive upland pastures like these has deliberately been maintained since the late Iron Age. And we find this in lots of areas of Wales, for example, in the Brecon Beacons, where we just got sheep grazing, and that's it. Nothing grows. Trees don't grow. I remember my university lecturer in Cumbria, he turned around and said, look, Carl, by all means, send me a gift in a post. But if I plant it anywhere outside my property, it's going to be eaten by sheep. So I sent him a holly bush all the way to Shetland. And the last time I spoke to him, it was still growing. Anyway, the holly bush itself, he said, look out, it's nothing but grazed landscape. So the sheep have been grazing for generation over generation, right? But before that, it would have been an agriculturally planted landscape. There's no reason to say that we can't plant trees up in upland areas. It's because they're being grazed upon by sheep that we can't grow trees there now. So again, looking at a medieval comparison again. Look at this. Look at this entire landscape. This is very very different than a usual medieval landscape. You can see these vast fields, these vast roads, and basically a trackway between them, right? And medieval arable open field system. Again, no sheep grazing, right? Again, talking about tenure, talk about the the feudal system, talking about tithes and so on. So cultivators could move easily from one holding to another. It's open. There's no sheep. Don't have to worry. Look at that though. So it's that great sort of landscape up near Leicestershire. Oh God, I'm getting rather knackered now. So what we're going to do? We're going to probably go to 1:15, and then we're going to call it a day, right? So I'm just going to double check to see how much. Oh yeah, folks, you see that image there, right? We've still got all of that there, so we'll do the rest of that next week probably, right? So this is what I've been talking about, an Iron Age landscape, right? Typical Iron Age landscape. See the little sort of areas of settlement there, and these field systems, right? These hang on, not that. You can see these round houses, settlements, and then what you've got is you've got these field systems, sort of like this, got them all over the place. This is the typical landscape that we're talking about in upland areas in South Wales, Cumbria, all over Scotland. So what they call one thing that we do talk about is, as mentioned by the scarf, as mentioned by the Scottish website and research forum, is that this is the word terminology for this is Paleolithic environmental data. Leave little doubt that arable agriculture was pursued extensively throughout the Iron Age in Scotland, variously witnessed by plant and pollen samples across this world, right? So this challenges one narrative, right? Lots of this landscape has been LiDAR surveyed, right? And what you can see there is likely that these are actually Iron Age field systems. You can actually see the plough marks there. Now, the one thing I'm going to say challenges the narrative is that whenever I'm talking about Scotland and the Highlands, I'm talking about the Grampian woodlands, right? And, you know, the pinewood forests. Now, but if this was agricultural, if where, you know, obviously when the Romans got there, they're not looking at this intense, deep woodland in forest in lots of areas if they're ploughing it, right? And that's a really good point. If they're ploughing it in the Iron Age, there's going to be no trees in those areas. Now, looking at where we are, for example, there we go. It's Perth and Kinross. There it is. You know, it's up there. It's near the Grampians. You know, so one thing in southern Scotland, at least, what we do is we are definitely looking at forest clearance and expansion of arable indicators as far back as around 1,000 years before the birth of Christ. But what we are looking at by the period of birth of Christ 2,000 years ago, we are identifying the fields that the trees have been cut down, right? Pollen is derived, evidence is derived, and we must challenge the usual assumptions of the upland areas. We've got these field systems, right? And I love in this. I didn't realize this was you. Stuart Piggott, the prehistoric archaeologist, wrote of Iron Age Scotland, these being the frontier Celtic cowboys. It's true. It's true. They're cutting down you know, with the Iron Age, and but how much of that is true, I don't know. An enduring explanation, but what we do have is that it's not Celtic cowboys. They've already been clearing these upland areas. So that's what he used to say in 1958, the prehistoric archaeologist Stuart Piggott, Celtic cowboys. So by the 1970s, Richard Beacon's summation of the upland areas is that this was a prehistoric agriculture across Highland Scotland. There we go. So we've got big tracts of these forests that we see in Hollywood movies in the Roman period in Scotland. They didn't exist. Ooh, changed a bit of history there. And we can actually tell by what's called lynchets and movements of soils throughout these upland areas in Scotland. So what lynchets are is that what you might get is not that. You might get a slope, right? And what's happening is that earth is building, right? So as the soil, as all the trees have gone, the soil is building up in what's called lynchets, right? And there's more banks going down. You can see this this type of agricultural system. This type of system is agricultural, and if you find these in woodlands, it means that in the Iron Age, that woodland that actually didn't really exist when the Romans got to Scotland, right? And the local people didn't hide behind trees because it simply didn't exist, right? Because it was an open agricultural enclosed landscape. When I say open agriculture, it means the trees are already gone, right? So we've got these miniature banks and walls and dikes across the landscape, some formed by soil erosion, and so making the landscape incoherent to modern eyes, disorganized. That's the Iron Age world. You know, I'm having that over there, Rod. You can have that over there. I'll have that. You know, these people living here, right? It's all to play for. Perth and Kinross. There we go. With trackways wending down and between fields and clusters of hut circles, and like we've got these round various different things. So we've got this landscape very much looking like this. So this is obviously in Hut now, but this is typically what some of our Iron Age systems would have looked like, right? typically Iron Age systems would have looked like. And again, looking back to this wonderful aerial view. So again, we're looking at not just in this locality, across the landscape of Perth and Kinross, across this big area, you know, north of Edinburgh, north of Glasgow. So what we've got, we're defining dozens and dozens of banks and field systems. And what we've got in other parts of Scotland, we're starting to see this. What's happened, folks, is that you get the Grampians, you've got this great forest, this great endless forest, right? And the problem is when you get this great endless forest, everybody thinks that nothing's happened there before. But when you start examining it, yes, the trees were cut down one stage. And now all the trees have come back. Oh, the trees have come back in upland areas. Oh my God, there couldn't have been sheep there. Exactly, that's the point. And when you think about the Amazon as well, and you think about how the Amazon basin is basically, we know that big tracts of the Amazon basin, for example, had been cleared, and now the trees are back. So it's very dangerous for me to say that if you cut down most of the trees in the Amazon, the trees would come back. They would, except you would lose most of the animals, but that's not the point. But up here, when you think about sort of lynxes and sort of pine martens and all the rest of it, they had to fend for themselves and survive, and the otters, whilst all these trees were being cut down to create this rich, imbued agricultural landscape. So even on the island of Arran, for example, what we've got in the 1970s and the 1990s, what we've got is clearance of trees, and we've got Bronze Age and we've got Iron Age landscapes. And so what they routinely find is in areas in Scotland, you find burial cairns, you find hut circles, you find field systems, and it's all haphazard layout. But that was, in fact, this world of the Iron Age agricultural landscape in Scotland. And what we've got is that we do believe that this landscape was being created well before the Iron Age. So, you know, you've got mixed soils, mixed contexts, mixed fields, mixed chronologies. And then what you finally find is across vast tracts of this landscape where the sheep are starting to graze and the cattle are starting to graze, trees can't move in. What's moving in is a peaty landscape. Peat is starting to take over the landscape. And this is very much what we're seeing. You know, this is a changing landscape. This is an altered landscape. So the field systems, and we talk about the rigs, you know, the cord and rig system, and understanding what's going on. And when we see Roman forts in Scotland, we think, oh, you know, it's a Roman fort. They must have cleared the woodland and they put a Roman fort there. Well, no, they just built the Roman fort on a field system that the Iron Age people had. You know, what we're finding is that we're now starting to realize that the Romans are not moving into Scotland without trees. Let's start again. The Romans are moving into Scotland without trees. So when they're building their forts, they're building their forts on agricultural, Iron Age agricultural landscapes. So the rampages of the past are allowing this to remain without trees because it's been constantly grazed on by sheep or constantly grazed on by cattle. And interestingly enough, peat is taking over these landscapes as well. If the trees don't take over, the peat takes over. So finally coming to the end today, and it's a shame because I wanted to do this site in South Wales, this wonderful site. I wanted to do all of this, right? But I need to get back, and I haven't eaten. But what we will do is we'll just quickly go back to, where is that image? This again, and we'll just mention this. So cordon rig is not the solution to agriculture in these areas. They actually, it's probably in the Iron Age, they realized that, it's really difficult to grow things in these areas. It really, really is. And they're like grandiose gardens, no matter what you're doing. And when people abandon this landscape in the Iron Age, they abandoned this landscape in the Iron Age for a reason. The last season of cultivation was for a reason, right? What happened for them to abandon this landscape? It was probably because coming into the end of the Iron Age, what was happening, it was getting colder, right? A different type of rain. Probably your crops weren't as productive as they had been before. And therefore you're abandoning your world, you're abandoning your cultivated landscape, and you're moving onto the lowland areas, which is probably causing a lot of hassle. And I'm just going to finish reading this. So there's lots of questions, and there's lots of examination to be made. And there's a point here. It remains to comment on the handful of field systems in the border counties that are Roman in date. And when you start thinking about are the Romans managing this Iron Age landscape in Scotland, the answer is it's probably very scrappy. It's probably there's not as much wealth in agriculture in Scotland as there had been before, because our Iron Age people had probably exhausted the landscape, abandoned the landscapes. The Roman administration moves into Scotland by about 80, 90 years AD, and they're looking at desolate landscape. And like this, it's already been gone and disrupted, and the Romans are probably. Now let's look at a reality, right? I'm gonna close this now. Let's look at a reality, right? Let's look at a fact, right? When we examine Roman Scotland, right, and this is one person who knows that the Romans managed to get all the way to John O'Groats, and because we've got evidence of forts all the way up the coast, all the way up the east coast, right? It's likely that the Romans really don't want Scotland because there's nothing there. There isn't the woodland, there isn't the trees, there's not readily available resources that they can actually find at that point, even though there would be later. The local tribes are not battling and fighting and killing the Romans every 5 minutes because we don't have that evidence. We start to look at Scotland as very, very different than what their history's, and we don't find massive battle sites where the Romans have fought the Iron Age peoples of Scotland, because they simply didn't exist. But when we do those lectures and understand what Agricola's doing in Scotland and all the rest of it, and the Battle of Mons Graupius, the battle of the Great Grampian Forest. If the Great Grampian Forest isn't there in the broadest sense, what is exactly going on in Scotland? More questions than answers, but I will be able to answer some of those questions again. On that moment, let's call this a day. And let's see if there's any questions. Right, so what we're going to do, we're going to start off with me putting the light on in here. Okay, good. And let's see, and we'll do Drina and then David in Arnside. Oh, and then we'll do Margaret and then Gobby, Emma and Richard. Right, Drina first.
No, I've got no questions. It was very interesting. It really was.
We filled quite a lot then, didn't we?
We did. Yes.
Yeah.
More to flow next week, much more. Thank you for that, Drina. David, anything from you?
No, thank you. Good night, all.
Bye,
Night,
David.
David.
Bye.
You have a good one, David. Night, David. Night. Right, who's next? We've got Richard and Emma.
Not from us. He's
Oh
on
my
the
God, it's quiet. It's quiet.
no,
Good.
no, he's on the phone.
Oh, is he?
All right, okay. Well, we can't all have his
Look.
love life, can we?
You know what? I cannot keep him under control. I try.
Yeah, well, he is your dad. Yeah, I remember. Should I be saying this? I remember seeing my parents today, and my mum was having a go at my dad for not doing the garden. You haven't done the garden. You haven't done the garden. Blah blah blah. Right. So he eventually goes in the garden, and I just says, "Why didn't you just tell her to off?"
Oh,
But my dad would not. My dad would not do that because he would end up with losing some teeth.
that is a brave man that says that to a woman.
Do you know what? Do you know what? We were in a green room talking today, and it was like there was this woman sat there, and I said, "Well, you can't tell women anything. They're all right. They're always right." And this woman was saying, I'm not always right." And this other bloke chips and he said, "Yes, women are always right." And this other bloke said, "Yes, women are always right. You can't tell them anything." And I'm just thinking, right, yeah, let's just get out of this conversation. Right, talking about women that are always right, Margaret.
oh, thank you, Carl. Am I always right?
Yeah, I probably got confused a couple of things tonight, but yeah, go on, Margaret.
You said it now. You've not mentioned about charcoal burning in the Iron Age, which was quite an important thing.
No! No! Please don't do that! No! Oh my God, we're never going to do this bloody subject! All right, we're going to do some charcoal burning in the Iron Age. I didn't go away with it! Right, okay,
it was important to produce the iron.
All right, Forest the Deep, charcoal burning. Yeah, we'll do a bit of that. Brilliant. You ruined my evening. Great.
Oh, sorry.
Anything else? Anything else, Margaret?
Was everybody a farmer in the Iron Age, apart from being blacksmiths and carpenters and weavers, etc.? Did they all take part in the farming?
It was very likely that there were certain trades that were really special. If you're working on pottery manufacturing, you can't really take a break. It's the same with metal manufacture. You can't take a break. Everyone's going to need tools. Even in the agricultural process, people are going to need iron tools to be sharpened on a regular basis by the blacksmith. So the blacksmith's not going to be able to help and take time off. He or she. So I think it's select industries, and obviously the reason why you've got a surplus and the reason why you've got more fields and all the rest of it is that you can pay the blacksmith, you can actually pay the potter and all the rest of it. So this is why you've got this landscape, and this is why crops are so important to Iron Age people. They cannot afford, because this is their currency, right? This is their currency. So they can't, but obviously it's an indicator that there are sheep around, there are goats around, there are cattle around, because they're enclosing their fields, except in Scotland they're not, because they don't have. So you can imagine in Scotland it's the other way around. If their crops fail, they're dead. That's it. There's no, they don't have sheep or goats. They're dead. End of story.
Okay.
So right, Anne.
No, that's I enjoyed it again. I'm amazed how you managed to find so many different subjects. Maybe we've not done this before. It's
no.
I'm amazed how often you can come up with something entirely new, and it's amazing. Anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Yeah, thank you for. Oh, Margaret. Remember John used to say Margaret. Anyway, thanks for that, thank you. Right, okay, talking about Margaret looking Fraggles type women, Judith.
Fraggle.
Well, sorry, I was my brain's just failed. The charcoal.
Lloyd George.
Hang on, just bear with me. Could the charcoal explain where all the trees went?
Well, why some of them went.
Well, obviously,
yeah, and then the sheep moved in.
Well, hang on a minute. We haven't got sheep there yet. So basically, obviously, charcoal. Right. It's not as simple as that. It's really not, because you've got to, you've got to coppice woodland, right, and you've got to have woodland to create charcoal, because it's the newer wood that you're burning, right? And it's not the older wood. The newer wood is going to create the best charcoal. We'll look at this next week. But obviously you can't cut down a woodland. You need the wood to create the offshoots, the tines, the branches to have the branches to create the charcoal, right? So no, that's not the no. So
Okay, that's the long answer, is it? Okay.
yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
I have no idea how they make charcoal, so that was a silly question. Thank you.
All right, then we'll do that next week. Thanks to Margaret. Anything else, Margaret? We may as well chuck it in there. Right.
I'm going to look at charcoal burning sites tomorrow with the.
Oh, that's why. Oh, devious. Yeah. We
won't be Iron Age. They won't be Iron Age, I don't think.
Okay, we could do bondage and sexual practice in the Iron Age, but that'll be a private class.
Oh, okay,
right.
that'd be fun.
Hey.
You're all invited. You're all invited. An extra fee on that one. We'll do some demonstrations. Right, Roger.
No, that's fine. Interesting, and I'll sign off now.
Okay.
Get my bit of rest.
Right, we haven't even done Andy yet. No, Roger.
Bye.
Bye.
No, lovely. He's a funny man, isn't he? All the men in these classes seems to be odd. Andy, there's only me and you left. All the rest are women.
Yeah.
Right, Andy, be very careful. Don't say anything about derogatory about women at all. You're not allowed to.
No. That place you were asking about, whatever it was, Common.
Mungristdale.
Yeah, it's
Mungristdale, yeah.
It's just north of Keswick. I didn't know it. I'd not heard of it, but I looked it up.
Oh, good.
It's near that place where John Peel lived.
Oh, really?
No, it's not.
Yeah. Do you ken John Peel?
Yeah,
He was from that area. What's
yeah.
that village called beginning with C?
Yeah.
Cockermouth.
No. I know what you mean, but
where the mountaineer lived.
That's further over. So, but yeah.
Oh, right. I don't
I know
mention
what you mean
Aspatria.
because I've been.
Yeah.
It's not near Aspatria, is it?
No, you're on the right on the west coast. This is kind of East Cumbria. So,
I don't go anywhere near Wigton.
Near Blencathra.
Yes. Yeah, Blencathra.
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough. I went to Wigton. I survived.
Jolly
well
good.
I was looking at moving there. Oh my God.
Really?
Did I tell you about the story about Aspatria? I got to tell you this again, right? There's this massive factory by our Aspatria, so we're going down the road, right? We went to this housing estate, right? And then we went to see this house on this like weird little estate type thingamajig, and there was loads of rubbish in the garden. So we said, well, what's all this rubbish doing again? Oh, the previous people, they were mucky people, we'll clean it all up and all the rest of it, right? And he said, it's a very peaceful place, this, right? So we went in the house and we went upstairs. And then the next thing, there was like 2 or 3 police vans opposite, right? And then apparently, I think there was a break in the back door or somewhere, and it was just like, oh, there's something not quite. So as we went outside, they were arresting several householders, and they were all being carried off into police vans. And he said, "Oh no, this doesn't happen often. It's just a one-off." I didn't end up moving to Aspatria. And Wigton, that's another weird one. We went to Wigton to see a house, right? And it was like. Apparently there's a bit of a Roman road or something marked there, or this is the alignment of a Roman road, and there's a plaque, and there's actually nothing there. And I'm glad I didn't move there because that's where the BNP is still based. So I got away with that one.
It's a bit that's like the Wild West out there, isn't it?
Yeah, a bit like West Wales. Flipping heck. Right, on that note, anyone want to say anything else before we call it a day?
No, thank you.
Okay, well, okay then. Many thanks for joining us tonight, and Emma and Richard and Margaret and Anne and Drina and Andy and Judith and anybody else online, right? I tell you what, let's just go quickly on YouTube and see if there's been any weird comments, right? Let's just see. There's usually some strange stuff. Let's just see if there's a weird one. Hang on a minute. Let's just see. Hang on. Where do I find this now? Hang on. It won't be a minute, folks.
Oh, it's usually me.
Yeah. Well, hang on a minute. Right. Here we go. Iron Age lush stuff. Hang on. Come on. Open. Is it going to open? It's not letting me open. Oh, oh, never mind. Oh, we can't have the delights of what's going on online, but never mind. That's a shame. And yeah, and apparently, if you put a cigarette in a container with soil for a year, all sorts of weird things happen.
What, to the cigarette or the soil?
The soil.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all sorts of weird plants start to grow.
Oh.
I'm still trying to get into this a minute. Hang on, I just done one more go. One more go. Oh, hang on, it's there. Hang on, nearly there. Just there. But do you ever get these days where nothing seems to work until you've finished? There.
Most days.
Oh, hang on. Let's have the chat. Oh, a dodgy git is still on, right? Daniel Plantagenet and dodgy git. He's talking about constellation maps, pigs, and he says tatty boys and Carl likes animals. Onion. How strange. Other than that, penny for the poor. Other than that, we're going to call it a night. So we'll say good night if nobody's got anything else to say. So night, Drina, night, Emma and Richard, Margaret, Anne, Judith, and Andy. I'll see you all soon. See you next week, Tuesday.
Bye.
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 Night, folks. Night. Night. You're still there. Right, okay. Many thanks, folks. And there's 3 people still watching, including Dodgy Git. So anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe, everybody. And something about pot to piss in. Good days, folks and freaks. Love up, yo. Sharing a guff in the tent or what, bruv? What the hell? Surprised they haven't called it a Norman Motton Daily Castle. True. I don't even know what that's about. Something to do with jockstraps. Anyway, that's it. That's on my YouTube. Don't ask. Anyway, many thanks for watching. And I'm just going to look in the chat box. I gotta go. Nothing in the chat box there. Nothing there. Nothing in the chat box. Nothing in that chat box. Okay. Okay. Nothing there. Nothing on that window. Nothing in that chat. No messages there. Nothing there. And nothing there. Okay. Amor hyd. Diolch yn fawr i chi. Gwelwch chi eto.